thank you for joining me and welcome to our first discussion on yoga sequencing. Let's come straight into the content of today's discussion. We're going to look at the purpose and value. So incredibly important, because if we ourselves as teachers, but also our students, see the value in something, that plays such an influential role into how connected we feel to the practice. Then we're going to look at the foundational structure, the framework of how to create your classes. Then we'll look at timing, obviously super important, and that's going to play a large part into how we choose different aspects of that framework for our class. And then finally, I'm going to give you a methodology or lead on to future videos that gives you a methodology of how to choose your postures. Let's look at a definition. So the definition of a class sequence. A class sequence in yoga refers to the deliberate, highlighted here. We could also put in intentional arrangement of postures or poses, asana, breathing exercises, pranayama, and other practices or techniques within a yoga class. Importantly here, it's deliberate, it's purposeful, it's intentional, so it has meaning. There's been some forethought, there's been some connection with the practice that you're creating. It's not done all of it off the cuff, just ad hoc, without that connection to what you're writing for your students and what you're presenting to your students. Let's look at the purpose. And again, I'm just going to read this short definition here. The sequence is designed to create a cohesive and balanced flow, and one that aligns with the class's intentional theme, and importantly here, addresses the physical, mental, we could say psychological, emotional, and spiritual needs of your students. And then again, importantly, one that adheres to the principles of yoga philosophy. A well-structured class sequence enhances the overall experience, ensuring safety, super paramount, progression for our students in many different ways, and also a richer connection to it, more fulfillment for our students. Let's come to the value. So the value is twofold. First of all, to our students, safety. As teachers, our primary objective is to serve. The great connection that we get from a yoga practice is that we feel we're being of service, that our practice is worthwhile and it's helping and supporting people. We're doing good in the world. It's karma yoga. And obviously within that context, we want to make sure that our students are safe and that we have planned to look after the students to the best of our ability. Secondly, consistency. This is, for me, is really important. If a teacher's consistent, not necessarily teaching the same things week by week, although that could be drawn into that idea of consistency, but more so that you can feel there's a thread to what the teacher's doing. When you turn up, you know how that teacher's going to teach, the cues that they're going to use, the influence they're going to have in the class. Instead of turning up and it's just like diving your hand into a magic hat and pulling out, anything could happen. And for some people, that might seem really exciting. But in my experience with students, they like things that are familiar, and they like to know that their teacher has planned, has put extra effort and sees value in their teaching, and is taking them on a journey. And that leads us to that third point, progression and development. Now, this is something we need good relationship with. Yes, the value of a yoga practice isn't primarily on improving students' asana practice or pranayama practice, but it does have a part to it. As we practice ambhyasa, maybe you remember that from the sutras, that another term for a yoga practitioner or a yoga teacher is an ambhyasi, a practitioner. And if you practice anything in life, you progress, you develop, you get better at it. And that might mean a richer connection to it. It might mean greater development of the postures. But progression for both yourself as a teacher and your students is much more important and should be much more highly valued than it is in some circles. You're helping your students grow as people, as yoga students, as spiritual beings. And you can do that in many different ways if your practice is structured, has that extra forethought, has intention and meaning and purpose. Let's go to yourself as a teacher. Clarity. Now, this is important for all teachers of all levels and all degrees of experience, but especially for those who are new to teaching. When you're at the front of a number of people, it's very unnerving for many of us. And so we want to speak with clarity. We want to speak with confidence. We want our cues to be clear and precise. And that's bettered if we're prepared, if we know where we're going next, if we know that the cues I use in this posture are going to help link me to the next one. I'm guiding my students on this systematic and progressive journey. And for me, that is very, very challenging to do if you're just making things up on the spot. That breeds then to point 2, confidence. You become confident because you know that you can review your sequence and you've looked after your students. It's progressive, it's systematic, it has intention and meaning, and you have covered everything that you feel is really valuable to you as a student. And now you're sharing that with your students as well as a teacher. Also means that here, point 3, you can be adaptable. If you know that you've got a particularly challenging posture coming up, a particularly complex posture coming up, you can already prepare the modifications, or you can prepare how to adapt your teaching cues for different levels of ability. And again, without that preparation of your practice, that's really, really challenging to do. Final 2 points are more personal things to myself. A richer practice and a deeper connection. For me personally as a student, right or wrongly, when I know that I feel the teacher is prepared, when I feel that I'm being drawn into their practice, when I feel this is really important to them, it's really valued by them, deepens my practice. I just like it more. I give myself to it more. Even if I don't particularly feel that what the teacher is teaching is relevant for my body or relevant for my practice at that point, because I feel, God, they've put effort into this. This means something to them. They've prepared this. I'm all in. I'm all chips in. Everything goes in. Let's go to the basic structure then. So basic structure, this is important to note. This is going to be very dependent, and the adaptability of it and your ability to adapt it is going to be dependent on a number of factors. First of all, the style you're teaching. If you're maybe teaching a more restoratively led practice, then there's maybe going to be less or no standing postures, less or no balancing postures. If you are teaching a more dynamic class or a more physical practice and you're looking to raise people's energy and really physically challenge them, then the consideration is maybe you're doing more standing postures, more challenging physical postures, more flows in between the postures. Second consideration is the duration of class. This is massive because back when I first was a student and when I was first teaching, I think the shortest class of yoga was 90 minutes back then. They were all like 90 minutes, usually 2 hours, lots of them. These days, because the practice has evolved and changed and adapted to meet people's lifestyles and meet them where they are, which is a really beautiful and incredible thing that the practice can do. Classes are often at 60 minutes, some are at 45. And that means you've got very specific time parameters to get a really cohesive, systematic and balanced practice in. And that means there's going to be some omissions. There are going to be some aspects of this structure that you're not going to include in your class. Time of day. Time of day comes in more so on an energetic level. So are you raising your students? Are you lifting them up? Are you needing to do, again, more physical, more standing postures in the practice? Are you preparing them for a rest, a good night's sleep, or more maybe meditative state? Next, we'll come to level of ability and knowledge. We'll group those two together, even though they're slightly different things. Level of ability, we could put this down not just to physicality and strength and flexibility, or the common ones that we look at, but also their knowledge of the postures. Finally, your intention. For me, this is everything. Your intention is what we want everything to grow out of. What are you wanting your students to experience? What are you wanting them to see in themselves? Do you want them to challenge themselves and recognize their strength and their fortitude and resilience? Do you want them to experience a sense of peacefulness? Are you looking to help them develop a specific part of the practice or learn something different, maybe a philosophical note? Let's come to that structure then. So again, remember, this is a framework. So we have our introduction. This is going to include simply how you introduce yourself. your name, style of practice, what your students can expect, and then an initial cue to encourage students to listen to their bodies, to connect to their bodies, and to take ownership and responsibility, to have the autonomy over their body and their practice. And that's really important that we highlight that at the start of the class. This is your class, and if something doesn't feel right, you're the best guide. Trust your intuition, and if you're unsure, call me over and I'll do my best to assist. Grounding. Now, grounding isn't included in all of the contemporary styles of yoga. There are many styles of yoga, some which start with a mantra and then bang you into sun salves, some which instantly start with sun salves or postures. For me, I feel that grounding is really valuable, and that's maybe from the influence of my earlier teachers who used grounding as a way to set the scene for practice, as a way to enable their students to come into a more balanced, cohesive state. You know what it's like when you come to a yoga practice. Sometimes you're really elevated and high, sometimes you're rushed, sometimes you're tripping and in a good space and calm and peaceful. You had a beautiful day. Grounding is a great leveler for your students. It allows you to get everyone on a similar level, almost like wiping the slate clean. Yoga, at its heart, is about connection. That's what the term means, union. And a grounding at the start of class gives people an opportunity, but importantly, it gives them the authority. It makes them go, yeah, it's okay to have a moment to yourself, to close your eyes or lower your gaze, to seal the lips, to feel the sensation of breath. And for a brief window of time, you don't need to do anything. Come to warm up and mobilization. So this is how we prepare our body, really important. Warm up and mobilization doesn't just warm up the muscles and the tissues of the body and get us ready for our practice, which means it's a safer practice, also means that we can deepen our practice, deepen the mind-body complex, our connection with our body, and also deepen the postures themselves. But it also increases something called synovial fluid. Synovial fluid is the fluid that we want to increase that lubricates the joints, allows the tissues to glide over one another smoothly, so there's less friction, less agitation, but also it carries the nutrients. So it's a healing mineral. On top of that, we improve our circulation. So as our circulation improves, all the good stuff in our body has more opportunities to find the not so good stuff and deal with it. Massively important. Then we come to sun salutation. So there's a double star here because many contemporary practices use the sun salutation as part of their mobilization. Many teachers separate the two, and my thoughts on that is that sun salutations for many people, pretty physical things, quite complex things to do, particularly if they're moving more fluidly. And so sometimes that extra or additional warm-up and preparation really serves the students. Then we come to standing postures, balancing postures. Standing postures are there to root us, get us to feel earthy and grounded, stable and safe. Balancing postures challenge that. They're incredible for our proprioception. They're incredible again for our mind-body connection and our spatial awareness. Then we come to the seated and supine postures, so reclined postures, things that are preparing us for meditation or relaxation. And then to that point, maybe we come into heart openers and twists, so those really euphoric postures, and then finally meditation, relaxation, or shavasana. I've grouped those because teachers choose different ways to close their class now. There's meditation practice, less commonly used these days. Relaxation practice, which is the most commonly used practice. Maybe some beautiful music, calming music is played and you leave your students for 5 minutes. This final part, the thing that we often miss off, the reawakening. So this is so important because you will testify to this. Sometimes when you come out of a yoga practice, you feel incredible, a little woolly-headed and a little dazed, and you're kind of in this really beautiful dreamlike state. And that dreamlike state is a shift in consciousness. It's a different awareness that you're in. And so while it can feel incredibly amazing, and it actually, studies have shown, it's incredibly beneficial for us chemically, it actually can leave us in a really vulnerable state. And then we leave the yoga studio, and many people have got to travel home, whether that's by car or by bike or even walking. And if we don't allow our students to reawaken, to reground, to connect and be focused, very similar to the grounding at the start, then we're sending them out into the world in a more open, potentially more vulnerable state. And that's not a good thing to do. So that reawakening, get your students back in the room, make that appropriate to the time of day and the style of class, but make sure they leave your practice, yes, peaceful, elevated, engaged, but present, ready to go. What about pranayama? So pranayama, breathing exercises. This is different for different teachers. And what I would say is lean into your intention and lean into what works for you. Many teachers use breathing exercises at the start of class. They're a great way to ground, specifically practices like Samavriti. Ujjayi is also really good. We evoke pratyahara without that drawing of the attention inwards. Some use more dynamic breathing techniques, skull-shine breath, Kapalabhati or Bhastrika, bellows breath, to really elevate their students to get them ready for maybe a more physically demanding practice. So it's a great way to shift our energy, which is the meaning of pranayama, and prepare students for practice. But we can also use it at the end. And if we use it at the end of practice, similar to how it's outlined in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the advantage here is that we've connected to our physical bodies. So in a mind sense, when I'm in yoga posture, I feel it like it's our physical body is material and dense. It's much easier to focus and connect to your physical body, to be aware of it, than it is many other aspects of your being. So through the yoga practice, when you're getting your students to focus on right hand here and shoulder here and twist here and feel the sensation here, each of those little cues is getting them to go, focus now, focus inwardly, focus on this experience, this sensation. And that means that as you finish the asana practice and come to pranayama, they're in a better placed position to focus on something as soft as the breath, as subtle as the breath. Remember, we've done on a previous discussion, you breathe anywhere between 21 and 23,000 times a day. So because it's so regular, we become apathetic to it. It's very challenging to stay with the breath. Even now, as learned yoga students, if after this discussion you were to close your eyes, set a timer, sit still and focus on the breath, it wouldn't be all that long before your mind wanders off and you twitch and you agitate. And that's normal and absolutely common. But if we place pranayama at the end of a yoga practice, the mind has become more honed, it's more focused, and now it can stay with the subtleties of the sensation of the breath. It's also a great way to prepare us for those other aspects that lead us into relaxation or meditation. So Patanjali outlined Samayana, so pratyahara, drawing the attention inward, Dharana, single point focus, dhyana, meditation. And they naturally flow from one to the next, from pranayama, breathing technique, drawing your attention inward to very subtle sensations. So it's a great place to place it at the end. So let's come to this. Then we have really three components of our class: introduction and grounding. That sets up the body. It covers all of the safety measures that you want for your students and lets them know what's ahead of them, gets them ready, more focused, more engaged. The class itself, again, we want it to be balanced and progressive and systematic, purposeful, that it's led by your intention. There's meaning to it. There's an energy to it. There's some connection, some of your passion in there. And then at the end, we close with the relaxation, the thank you. And importantly, we haven't included here two things: the reawakening and then the invite to your next practice. Something that, again, I myself really need to write this down in my notes for me to do this adequately. But your students want to know where you're teaching next. Dependent on what the studio's policy is. Some studios don't want you to say that you're working at other studios. Others are pretty open with that. Either way, invite them to practice with you next time. If you're a cover teacher, encourage them, if they enjoyed the class, to tell the studio coordinator, the studio manager, the studio owner, because it's only in that moment that you're going to get that response from them. Simply finishing the class, and you know what it's like after a yoga class, life is busy. We've got many things to do. But if my teacher has asked me to speak to the studio manager if I enjoyed the class, I will. If I feel really connected to a teacher's practice and they say they're teaching somewhere else, I would look at that. I would seek that out. If they said nothing, I'd roll up my mat and walk, go home. That's what I'd do. So try to remember to layer that into class 2. Let's come to the wave. So the wave, this is how the energy flows through a practice. So here, the grounding, let's actually imagine that that curve starts up here. So you come into practice, you may be a little dull or a little agitated, a little high. Then the grounding is the leveler. Introduce yourself as a teacher, ground everyone, bring them into a similar state of being. And then from that point on, from the mobilization to maybe the sun cells, if you're using them, you're building the energy. And all classes, even restorative classes, are a journey, and they build you to a point, and that could be a more complex, more challenging posture, or to highlight, if it's a restorative class, the most calming, supportive, beautifully relaxed posture, maybe the posture that you're in for the longest duration. But there's always this pivotal point, the peak that you're leading your students to. And then importantly after that, we need to bring them back down and guide them into a more relaxed or meditation state. And then, as we previously mentioned, importantly, you don't leave them there. You don't wake them up all days and they're all, you know what it's like, you feel like your body's just melting off you and you're in a, God, this is so amazing, I feel so great. And the teacher goes, namaste, bump, and they're out. And you're like, looking around the room, not knowing what's going on. Bring your students back up, boom, 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 get them back in the room, get them focused. Thank you, come and see me next week. Have a great day. Let's look at timing then, because for me, this is a good one. It's a bit of an eye-opener. Right, so on your papers at home, get a piece of paper out, draw this timeline that you've got at the top. Don't write in the things that we have done. Let's break down a 60-minute class, because when you are asked to create a 60-minute class, head explodes and you have an instant meltdown, because an hour's practice of all these postures that have got to get into an hour seems like an incredible, almost insurmountable task. But when you sit with it and break it down, you go, I haven't really got a lot to do, actually. Let's look at this. Now here, I've used very conservative numbers and timings here. We're going to start with our introduction. So your introduction is going to include welcoming your students, introducing yourself if you've not met any of the students before, potentially asking for newbies, people who are new to your practice or new to the studio or even new to yoga, if you haven't met them previously. It's going to include what the style of class is, what your intention of class is, what should they expect in class? Is it dynamic? Is it free-flowing? Is it fluid? Is it calming? Is it relaxing? That is minimum 5 minutes. Believe me, minimum 5 minutes. Let's go right to the other end then. The awakening, the thank you, the goodbye. You don't want to rush students through that. Again, in that daisy dream-like state, you've got to give them the time to slowly reawaken their body, mobilize and move, connect and reground, then gather themselves, then maybe reconnect to their personal intention or your intention. Give them a moment to connect to the breath. Give them a moment to recognize where they are in the room. Then say your thank you. Then invite them to the next class. Trust me, minimum 5 minutes. So that's 10 minutes. We're already down to 50 minutes. Mobilization, I would always encourage you to include some form of mobilization, even if it's like we said before, the joint mobilization to increase the synovial fluid or get the temperature of the body elevated. Even in restorative yin-based practices, I would encourage that, because it's a really great way of getting your students to connect to their body where they're not trying to achieve things and deepen the practice, and also really physically beneficial too. Minimum 5 minutes, super conservative, minimum 5 minutes. Let's go back to the end of the practice now, the relaxation. So relaxation, shavasana, meditation. If it's a guided practice, I would always encourage a guided practice and a relaxation afterwards where you're not talking. Give your students some time and space to be with themselves, that unique element where they get opportunity to connect, to be present in the moment, not trying to do anything in their lives. Absolute minimum 5 minutes, by the way, minimum 5 minutes. Again, when I first started practicing and when I first started teaching, classes were longer, and my teacher instructed me it was minimum 10 minutes, but 20 minutes. Get your students to 20 minutes, shavasana, relaxation, and maybe there's some included meditation at the start of that. 20 minutes though. So we're really at the conservative end of this. And you know, as a student, Few people really struggle with relaxation and shavasana and meditation, but many people find it really valuable. Super, super, super valuable. Minimum 5 minutes. Let's jump back to the start. If you're including sun salutations or moon salutations or some form of flow practice before you come into the main body of your class, easy 10 minutes. Trust me, 10 minutes is about 3 to 4 sun sals. By the time you've got your cues in and set your students up and move them up and down the mat, 10 minutes. So let's look at this. Using conservative numbers, you've got 30 minutes left. So really, in essence, a 60-minute practice, you're writing a 30-minute practice. That's all. So it's not insurmountable. In fact, on the course already, you've done something very similar. And when you start to add in your cues, when you start to add in your modifications, actually here, you're looking at a much smaller number of postures than you first realized. So in essence, 25 to 30-minute practice. And again, you could quite simply here lengthen the relaxation, the shavasana. I would always lean to that, but I'm a meditator. And also your mobilization, I would always lean to that. Those that practice with me know that our grounding and mobilization at the start is very extended because I see the value in that for my students. Let's come to, before we close, music. So music can both support and be an incredible distraction to class. So really important things to consider. The style of class, the music needs to support the class. It needs to hold the class. It's not going to be all that great to practice or to put together a more restoratively led calming practice and put gangster rap on and thrash metal on. It's probably not going to work. Now, those types of music might really work for other modalities. Restorative, probably not so much. At the other end, if you're looking for a more dynamic practice, a stronger, more fluid practice, you're trying to get the energy up and challenge your students, probably want to come away from the panpipes. That's probably not a good idea too. But importantly here, you write your practice, you sit with it, and you have fun with the music. You don't get too invested in it, you don't get too caught up in it, and you use music that feels right, that importantly supports the class, doesn't lead the class. Make sure that the yoga is center stage. Don't detract from the yoga. The music's great, but the music is there to support the yoga practice. Make that center stage. Lyrics. These are important, particularly at certain parts of the class. There's very few times when I would say to you, don't do something or you must do something, but this is one of those. In your grounding and in your relaxation, and especially if you're using a guided relaxation at the end, if you're encouraging students to connect to their breath or to their body, don't do that and have lyrics on. Especially when students are maybe lay down or sat with their eyes closed. If they haven't got a visual on you to at least see what your mouth is doing and try to lip read, if you've got your voice and then lyrics in the music, it's really hard to distinguish which one you should listen to, and it's super frustrating as a student. So in those instances, music without lyrics, things that aren't distracting, make your voice the thing that they want to tune into, your instruction the thing that they want to tune into, or don't lead them with lyrics. Let them just have some time and space. Let's come to the assignment then. So from here, I want you to write a 60-minute practice, and these are important components. The intro script, let's write that out in full. The paragraph of that, write it all out so we have it, so I can see it. The class sequence, just simply list the postures, list the techniques, the pranayama, the postures that you're going to use, the mantra, the mudra, just list it all out. Practice it, time it, make sure it follows a nice, smooth, rhythmic wave. Then the relaxation, are you going to use music? Are you going to have silence? Is it going to be a guided practice? Make choice of that. And then finally, the awakening script and the thank you, write all of that out. I want to see that. I want to see what you're putting together to make sure that that opening part, the introduction and the awakening part is concise. You don't ramble on, it's concise. And it touches all the things that are really important for your students and for you as a teacher. That you ground them, you reawaken them, you invite them to your next class. So let's recap on that. the full paragraph, the full script for your introduction only. Write the class sequence out, just the names, and write the Western or Sanskrit names, that's fine for me. Then your relaxation, make details of that. I'm going to use music with no words. I'm going to use music that has words, but I think these are really important and really supportive, and I want to use them. Boom. Then the awakening script, write it all out so we can read it and you can learn it better. Now from here, I'm also going to include a methodology of how to write that midsection, that 30-minute practice, that then when you put this into what you've already learned, you've got a 60-minute class. So you will find that in our next video. So don't overthink it, trust your intuition, use the postures and practices that work for you. I will see you in the next video. Thank you for listening.